And that's your news update for now, Brian. You can check more on KCLR96fm.com or on the KCLR app.
The KCLR Daily with Brian Redmond. Talk to Brian on 1800 90 96 96.
Thanks, Martin. We'll have more from the newsroom at 1 when you get your main afternoon news. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we met for the first time Fiona Murphy, the bunny coach, and she gave us some great advice. And she's back with more. Fiona, great to have you back with us this morning.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me again.
Just as it turns into the afternoon, of course, it is now 3 minutes past 12, so it is technically the afternoon. I hope you had a good day. But listen, we got such a reaction to our conversations the last time. We were delighted to ask you back because bunny rabbits, as we found out, they're probably the third most popular pet out there, aren't they?
Correct. Yes, exactly.
And
more out there than you think.
And if anybody's got questions for Fiona, do give us a shout. 083 306 9696 is the text and WhatsApp line, brought to you by Breast Drive. Now, we're going to start about something that you touched on the last day. You mentioned actually how difficult it can be to get rabbits to cohabit. I thought, based on the stereotypes of what we knew about rabbits, they were only too happy to spend time with one another.
Yes, so you would imagine so when you see all videos of them in the wild and they're living in a run or a warren, and they're an underground run like a warren, and they're all living happily together and they're binking around the fields, and you think that's great, they must just get on with it with any rabbit. But the reality is that there's a hierarchy goes on underneath the ground where everybody knows exactly where they stand, who's the boss rabbit and who are second and third and all that, all the way down, and who's very bottom of the pile. And when rabbits come together in domestic settings, the same thing has to be worked out. So when you buy or get two baby rabbits, quite often people are talked into getting two because they think this, and people are told as well by whoever they're buying the rabbit from that they should have two because they're great company for each other. But the reality is that any baby rabbits will get on with any other baby rabbit. But then the hormones kick in, they become teenagers and they don't want to get on anymore. So they want to work out their hierarchy, and they will fight, unfortunately, when the hormones kick in quite often, in order to try and work that out.
And can that be a challenge? Because, I mean, if you've gotten the two rabbits together as two very young rabbits, you might think, they've always gotten on, they'll be grand. What should you be looking out for in terms of that sort of change into the teenage period when they're trying to kill one another, I suppose? And how quickly can it happen?
So it can happen quite suddenly, unfortunately. So people always think that they'll get a warning sign. And sometimes, unfortunately, things happen when we're not there, so we don't see things building up. But also sometimes it can happen very suddenly as well. So things like if they start to chase each other, they start to mount each other, or you see a bit of nipping, bit of pushing and shoving going on. Those are your warning signs that these rabbits need to be separated now. So it's really sad because a lot of people do get them as babies and think that they'll always be friends, and then they're heartbroken when they fall out and they can't put them together. And also, unfortunately, there can often be a lot of vet injuries as well, or injuries that require the vet as well, because they have actually really hurt each other. And
would that happen within a matter of months, or are you looking at maybe a year after they've both arrived happily in the house as juveniles?
So quite a lot sooner than that usually. So most people would get a baby rabbit kind of 8-10 weeks of age, and at any point fairly soon after that, within the next kind of 3, 4, 5 months, the whole thing can just fall apart, unfortunately. So yeah, it can happen fairly suddenly, and usually if they get past that stage they'll be okay. But with boy rabbits, it's very, like, there's a 99.9% chance of them falling out. Girls, slightly less so, but still very, very high chance of them falling out. And of course, there's also the risk that you've been missexed the babies, and that you've got a male and a female after all, because they're very hard to tell when they're young as well.
Okay. The male and female thing, I mean, if you do want to have a male and female rabbit, is that something that you seriously need to consider? Do you need to make sure that you get them neutered or spayed or whatever the phraseology is around rabbits?
Yes, so either way, if you're getting baby rabbits, you should really separate them from around 10 or 11 weeks because of the risk of them falling out and because of the risk of them being missexed as well. So unfortunately, that means fairly soon after somebody gets a rabbit, within a week or 2 weeks, they could be going, oh, right, now I have to separate them and this is not what I intended at all. And of course, then you need 2 separate setups as well, 2 separate cages or runs. And people aren't always prepared for that, unfortunately. And that's if they're able to separate them before there's an injury. So, yeah.
And do you simply have to separate them, or are there steps that you can take to help them get along?
So in some circumstances, they can be okay when they're supervised. So if your rabbits are okay when you supervise them and they're not misbehaving or fighting, sometimes you can do that every day and that will help maintain their bond, but you still need to get them neutered, because the reality is that the hormones will kick in and they'll have hormone surges their whole lives. And just because they're fine one day does not mean that they'll be fine the next day. And so it really just needs to be very closely supervised if you're going to let them have any time together. But even with that, they can go into what we call the ball of fury within seconds, where they're biting and they're scratching and they're kicking at each other, and they can really do a lot of damage. Unfortunately, it's quite distressing. So yeah, it's best to separate them, really.
And is there any benefit in having rabbits that are maybe aged differently? Do older rabbits tend to fight less with younger rabbits, or is it the same across the whole of their lifestyle?
It's the same, really. An older rabbit sometimes will tolerate a baby for a little while, but then the hormones of the baby will start to kick in. But a lot of time what you'll find is if you've got an older rabbit, that they're kind of like an only child. So they're like, this is my house, these are my people, what are you doing here? And they will not be receptive to the idea of a stranger being in the house. So really my advice would be to either adopt a bonded pair if you want to. From the very get-go, a lot of the rescue centres would adopt out bonded pairs where they're already neutered, already living happily together, or just to get one rabbit, and then when they're old enough to be neutered, then adopt a second one that is already neutered if you can, because obviously adopt, don't shop. But also it's quicker. If you wait and you have an older rabbit and then you get a baby rabbit, you're still going to have to go through that process of separating them, and they can't be neutered till they're around 6 months of age.
Oh, right, okay. So if you're getting them as young rabbits, you're going to have to probably put up with it between that sort of 10-week period when it might become an issue and the 6 month stage at which they can be neutered.
That's right, exactly. So there's around 6 months where they're apart before you can even start trying to rebond them. And then it's what they call bonding. It's like a dating process where you have to supervise them closely. So usually in a small pen, to let them work out their differences without hurting each other, but allow dominant behaviours so that they know who's boss. And then they have a really strong hierarchy at the end. And they do say a male-female, just coming back to your male-female thing, they do say a male-female pair can work best, but really it's down to personalities. You need one rabbit to be dominant and one to be submissive to the dominance, and then it doesn't matter what sex they are, they'll get on.
And the neutering obviously deals with one specific problem, which is the potential for 2 rabbits to turn into 10. But does it also deal with the aggression? Does that neutering stop the aggression as well?
Yes, it does, yes. And they can be aggressive towards each other, but they can also be aggressive towards people when their hormones kick in. Particularly females can get quite territorial and can start lunging, and a lot of people then end up rehoming their rabbits because they can't put their hand in the cage. The rabbit was fine and then seems to have had a personality transplant, and really that's hormones. So they're also very prone to reproductive cancers. The females have an 80% chance of getting reproductive cancers by age 4, and they can live to 10 or 12. I think I mentioned this the last week. So there's a whole load of reasons why, it's a good idea. But definitely if you want to bond them, you need to take the hormones out of the equations. It'll calm the aggression down altogether.
And of course, most people that are getting rabbits because they want to have a nice fluffy pet that they think is all cuddly. You very rarely hear of people going out and buying guard rabbits in the same way they might buy guard dogs. So when you consider that most people want the rabbit to be nice and fluffy and cuddly, it seems strange to me that actually almost everybody should be getting those rabbits neutered to achieve that.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes with male rabbits, they're okay and they don't turn aggressive, and that's quite often the case, and they don't have the same chances of getting reproductive cancers. It's quite small chance of them getting like testicular cancer or something like that. So a lot of male rabbits can be a good starter pet if you just want the one rabbit. I mean, I do recommend they're in pairs, but quite often they can be quite affectionate and they don't necessarily need the neutering unless you want to reduce the chances of the cancer or you want to bond them later on with another rabbit. So,
Is it expensive to get done?
It is. You're looking at anything from around 200 to 400 euros per rabbit.
Okay, that is quite a chunk of change.
So, yeah, and especially because the rabbit savvy vets, I think we talked about that last week as well. They have horses, they have to be very specialist. Rabbits need a lot of care when they're under anaesthetic. They're very sensitive, so it needs to be done right by the right vet to reduce the chances of a risk with the anaesthetic. Yeah,
it's quite a substantial cost, isn't it? I mean, it's probably something that people don't realise, and maybe when they're considering getting a family pet, they might be thinking, well, we'd love a little dog, but we want a particular breed, and that might be 400 or 500 euros. And what would you pay to a reputable breeder to get a rabbit before you factor in those other costs?
I don't know. Currently, the last I heard, it was around €70, 70 to €80 at a pet shop or from a breeder. So, and the rescue centres, obviously, it can vary. There will be an adoption fee just to make sure that they're not falling into the wrong hands. But that would probably be cheaper. And a lot of the rescues would also neuter the rabbits and probably vaccinate them as well. They need annual vaccines. So it can be a more cost-effective way to do it if you don't want to go down the road of paying for neutering and the stress of getting them over.
So that's an important point to get out there, that if somebody is considering a family pet and maybe doesn't have the want or the ability to go and pay €300, €400, €500, whatever it might be, to have a new rabbit neutered, if you actually go to the rehoming centres, you may actually be able to foster or rehome a rabbit that has already been neutered and had its vaccinations.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. And the rescue centres are very good in that most of the time that they would know the personality of the rabbit as well, and they would be good at matching people to rabbits as well, which is a good idea too.
That's a huge cost for those rescue centres to take on, because I mean they may be getting a small little bulk discount, but I presume they're not getting the animals neutered for a cost of €50.
Absolutely not. No, I'm sure they don't. No. So they do rely on the donations and fundraisers and government funding. For some of them, they don't all get that, but yeah, it's costly for them for sure.
Fiona, it seems we've mentioned them. Are there particular centres that you would recommend to people, particularly if you think about the region that we're in, Kilkenny, Carlow? If somebody's listening this morning, would like a bunny rabbit, doesn't want to go to that hassle and cost, and is also trying to do the ethical thing of rehoming a rabbit that's been taken into care, where should we go?
I don't actually know of any in the central area there. Have you got an SPCA out that direction?
Possibly, yeah. We can find those details, yeah.
Yeah, I'll do some research and I'll come back to you on that. In Dublin, that's where I am. The DSPCA is excellent. Meath, Last Hope Charity are very good. They deal with a lot of rabbits as well. Galway SPCA would have rabbits. So there's a lot around the country. I'm sure Google would probably
help, yeah. And if you reached out to any of those organisations, they'd probably be able to steer you to something in this area if it was immediate. Yes. But I mean, by the time we speak again, Fiona, I'm sure you'd be able to tell us whether there are or whether it's a case of reaching out to those other areas to see if there's something there. Do you think the number of people having bunny rabbits as pets is on the increase or decrease?
I would say it's slowing down a little bit. There was a big increase of it over COVID, and of course a lot of the rabbits ended up in rescue centres afterwards or dumped because people didn't really understand how much care there was involved in them, or they went back to work and didn't have or want the time to do it, or the kids got bored or whatever. So there was definitely a huge increase in it, but I think it's slowing down a little bit now, but I'm open to correction from the rescue centres on that. But still, there's a lot of them around, a lot more than you'd think. Yeah.
Well, the bunny coach, as she described, Fiona Murphy. Remind us of your social media platforms, Fiona, in case anybody is intrigued and wants to get some further advice before they make that leap.
Yes, absolutely. So you'll catch me on therabbitrooms.ie. That's my main website. All the details are on there. FIONA'S Happy Bunny Club is my online bunny club where there's all sorts of care, information and classes and live events for people. So if you're thinking about getting a rabbit, it's a great place to join. And I'd like to offer your listeners 10% off as well if they use the code radio2025. They can use that for any of my services. And the bunnybondingcoach.com is where they'll find information if they need help if their rabbits have fallen out.
Okay, brilliant, Fiona. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for bringing us all that, and a nice little gift to our listeners as well. Fiona Murphy, the bunny coach, and she'll be back with us next month and she'll be able to tell us more. Here's time for Inhaler now. It's called A Question.